So that's what I'm saying. The text is like an object. It's gonna change perspective based on where you're standing. I don't know.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I missed you, baby sweet. It was a day.
It was a day.
Please tell me you're seeing this too.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. I'm Taylor Baker.
And I'm Michael Clausen.
Oh, hey, Michael, why don't you figure out how to introduce this particular episode? Is it a festival coverage? Is it a doc talk? Why don't you title it?
I think you hit both of the ways I would describe it. It is yet another doc talk edition of Drinking the Movies on the occasion of the Hot Docs Film Festival.
Correct. So I guess I'll go with something like Hot Docs Doc Talk? Or,
I like that.
Doc Talk Hot Docs 2021. Yeah. Because we normally do parts, so Doc Talk part, whatever this one is, maybe 6 or 7, and then go.
Hot Docs edition?
Yeah, Hot Docs 2021 edition. And then, introduce the titles. It'll be a really short title.
We have an injured team today. You have a injured kidney. I have an injured finger. We are not drinking beer. We are recovering today.
We are well hydrated, and we are taking a bunch of caffeine in our uptake system. We just watched Audible, the first documentary title we're going to talk about right before starting the episode. But as always, before that, we're going to hit the first impressions titles. We've got Witches of the Orient and I Walk on Water. Which one do you want to start with, Michael?
How about Witches of the Orient?
日本で一番のチームだったので そうですか
4e championnat du monde de volleyball.
All right, we just watched the trailer for The Witches of the Orient from director Julian Farreau. What are you thinking?
For me, I'm very interested in this. In the Realm of Perfection was a fascinatingly constructed and particular examination of mathematics within the game. Rather than mathematics, we see animation as kind of the motif that he's going off of, which is the kind of resurging or, stabilizing Japan, making an image and a collective story for itself to continue after the war. It's just a totally different format of presenting a art form through sport than I'd expected. But I'm still very, very interested. Just kind of caught me off guard. But I liked a lot of the motifs of what I saw, and they put a smile on my face as I heard the sound effects, the anime-like slashes and chimes.
Yeah, I think it looks cool. I don't know that I would be chomping at the bit to watch it if we hadn't already seen the John McEnroe doc and really liked that. There was such a strong kind of cinematic aspect to that movie that really appealed to me. At first glance, this looks more like a kind of straightforward doc about a Japanese female volleyball team from the 60s that is just a very specific thing that I wouldn't necessarily be jumping to go see. But I think it does look cool. I would agree the kind of combo of animation and archival footage looks cool, and the fact that he's talking to these women now in old age, and it looks like they'll be kind of reflecting on it, could be kind of interesting. It's partly just about their memory of the experience, not just a straightforward history of it. That could be interesting. Yeah, I am optimistic.
Same. All right, on to I Walk on Water from Kalika Law.
When she's a good guy, yes. When she's a bad guy, no. When she's a good guy. When she's a good guy. When she got all the girls said my friend she stay. Friend she a good guy. Friend she a good guy, yeah. Whoever want a Frenchman, raise a hand to the sky and say, French never let you down. Keep you warm a little long, yeah.
All right, Michael, that was the trailer for IWOW, or I Walk on Water from Kalika Law, one of your favorite kind of lower budget documentarians since we've started the show, as far as I'm aware. What do you think of this trailer for I Walk on Water?
I don't know that I'd go that far as to say it's one of my favorites. I remember being very excited and optimistic about Black Mother. That was from 2018.
You did. That was your most anticipated film, I think. Not
it was definitely on there. Yeah, but I think I had it at like a 3.5 out of 5, and I think I still would probably put it there. The look of this movie reminds me more of like the couple. I think we did maybe 2 shorts of his before we watched Black Mother, if I'm remembering correctly. Yep. And those were more about people on the streets of New York City, and that's what this one looks like. It is kind of this little, urban symphony of people who just are spending their time on the streets. I kind of like that in short form. This is 3+ hours. I fear I am not sure how it will be able to sustain itself for that long. That is a lot. I'm a little nervous. What about you?
I am more than a little nervous. I am weary already from that 200-minute runtime I think I saw. It looks really good. There's no doubt about the fact that with Kalika Law's images, I want to hit print, want to put them in a frame, want to hang them on a wall. But like you mentioned, I almost think that this is like the same, like 99-cent store, or like it feels the same. It feels like I've already seen some of these faces in those shorts. I just really genuinely don't have interest in something that's this long. I'm glad that he's continuing to experiment with long-form storytelling, and, collecting that footage and assembling it. I think we're a ways away from whatever it is that Kalik's going to actually be remembered for. And this is rather just like a pavestone on the way there, rather than the monument that you arrive at in his career.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those where I will let others go first and report back, and it maybe and hope they say that there is something new. Kind of, there's a little more to it than what we had seen previously in the shorts, and that would encourage me to sit down for a 3+ hour watch. Let someone else try the water first.
Yeah, I don't think anything would actually get me to sit down for the 3+ hour watch, but just hearing good things about it would make me more confident to sit in on the next one.
There you go. Cool.
All right, on to Netflix's Audible.
All right, this is directed by Matthew Oggins. You mentioned it was a Netflix film. I'm actually not sure what the release plan for this is. It's not currently on Netflix, but it will be coming soon. Is that right?
It will be coming soon. I believe that it's supposed to be on there in early July, according to some press stuff that we've received. I've since heard that same stuff retracted in multiple instances, so I'm not too confident that they know exactly when they're releasing what they have on their hands. But I would expect it will launch this summer. I think that Matthew told me it was going to be this summer, so you can at least say that confidently.
Yeah, it is. Shorts have kind of a funny place within Netflix, because I don't know that I've personally have ever seen a shorts like carousel. Maybe there is, or maybe it
You have to type
exists.
in short, and then there's a category that pops up.
Yeah, it's tagged in some way.
All of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Audible is a documentary short, but a rather long documentary short, clocking in at 39 minutes. It is about the students at a Maryland school for the deaf, and it's particularly focused on members of the football team and friendships between them and their experience on a hot winning streak. Yes. 40+ games over several seasons.
42 games over, do you even know how many seasons that takes, is I believe what his father says, Amari.
I'd be pretty nervous at like 10 games that this can't go on for too much longer, and they did 40. That's pretty good.
Right? So one of the interesting things that I found out is that he kind of built up a relationship with the coach of this team over the years, and he'd been on campus and collected footage over multiple years. And just this year, everything kind of hit, and what we see is 2019, the 2019 school year, rather. And it's kind of interesting to imagine being a documentarian, and you're trying to make a documentary about high school kids, but they're seniors and now they're gone. And okay, so you have this tiny little window to shoot, and just imagine just kind of going back to the well over and over, and just like you miss 1 year, there's nothing that comes of it. Another year, nothing comes of it, and then you just get kind of all the stars to align, where Amari, our star here, is like very magnetic, kind of indefinable as far as like how you would construct him to someone just verbally, like who he is and what he is as a person. So it's very interesting that a documentary like this even got made, just because of the half-life in these schools where people aren't the same thing and they don't stay for very long.
Yeah. We're meeting a handful of different people, but Amari McKinstry Hall is sort of our primary focal point. Mm-hmm. He's a young man who lost his hearing due to meningitis at an early age, 2 or 3.
2.
We're primarily focused on him, but we meet his friends as well. Very much a tragedy as we learn about a close friend of his who took his own life after being subjected to bullying, which sounded just like ridiculously cruel. That was quite shocking. So it's a very tragic documentary, that's for sure.
Yeah, that kid's name who hung himself was Teddy. And he was, I think, best friends with Amari, but he was also dating the male cheerleader. So it was kind of, like that emptiness of that friend group that we kind of see throughout this documentary. And, there's that line that number 23 says during his father's sermon. He references it. So I'm referencing a reference to the reference. Mm-hmm. And it's about this team that beats them for the first time in the very beginning of the film. He says, "This loss will not define us." And it's counterintuitive, but the spirit is there, where at the center of this film is just this emptiness, this loss that kind of defines these people's backbone and how hard they are, whether it's his mother or him or the girl who I'm forgetting the name of. They're all experiencing these hardships and these losses in different ways. Him in the fact that he lost his hearing, his father left the family, his best friend committed suicide. There's all these different losses, but they're not letting it define them. So even though that statement's maybe not correct, I think that spirit really rings throughout the entirety of the project. Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, and maybe you do know this and can share, but how he did land on the runtime. Since it's about 40 minutes, it kind of feels like, if anything, it could be a feature. It feels like there's a lot here to explore. I do have to say, I kind of feel like there are things that just feel kind of underexplored. Like, I would just rather this be a real full-length feature. Do you know if there was intention or purpose behind making this a short?
I think that it was kind of open-ended as far as the runtime. I think it was always intended to be a short, but the runtime wasn't really ironed out. It was him working over Zoom with his editor. They just kind of stumbled onto the way to tell this arc that feels the most holistic and makes sense the most. I agree that there's moments that I'd like to watch breathe, but I do question, if you start letting it breathe in certain places, if you lose the effectiveness and kind of the fast 2-wheel drive car that it already is. Maybe you can make it go further and do more, but maybe you lose some of the functionality that makes it fun in doing so. I thought myself about that quite a while after I watched it the first couple times, and I'm not sure that I have a right answer, but I definitely felt that same way. Like, why isn't this? There's so much here that I'd like to see more of, but I also am saying that I'd like to see more of it, which means you win. As a filmmaker, you got me to say that, which is a win in and of itself.
Yeah. yeah, I might have responded a little more unfavorably in that sense, and just that it just felt like there was just kind of a little bit of a lack of exploration in a sense, and that's partly due to the filmmaking, I guess. It is kind of an interestingly shot documentary because I think it in a way it feels more like a narrative feature in its polish. We have some really sleek kind of camera work with tracking shots. I think the kind of convention of documentary today skews a little bit more towards verite. There is a way in which this sometimes feel to me, I hate to say it, but a little bit more like something like a Nike ad than, a real kind of raw, authentic portrait of these real people. I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it is decidedly polished and exuberantly lit in its nighttime sequences. There's all that flash and stuff. But, I mean, I don't know. When the content is a teenage boy that hung himself after he was bullied incessantly, and your main character is a 2-year-old child that had meningitis and lost his hearing, and his dad ran away on him, and his best friend committed suicide. Like, when that's at the heart of the documentary and that sticks with me, I feel like the artifice that is glossy doesn't detract in the way that it would in other projects. I think it's just because the content I took home with me means that I'm incredibly forgiving to this kind of Michael Bay-esque looking cinematography where it's just gloriously bright.
It is, yeah, very handsomely shot, no doubt. And I mean, just the fact that it kind of even exists is just kind of, it's just kind of an immensely kind-hearted gesture in itself. It does seem to really kind of, I think you could argue it is very much celebrating these kids by applying that kind of polished filmmaking. Especially in scenes where we're not on the football field, but like at the parties or dances that are like in slow motion and we're hearing music.
Road.
Yeah, those are clearly much more kind of romanticized in a way, but in a way that I think is very much meant to celebrate these experiences they're having, which are kind of their last moments of high school. So
yeah, and you're kind of conveying how I personally think, as someone that went through that experience, that in depicting it that kind of glorious, exuberant way, you're transmitting some of the fervent energy in these particular kids in this particular moment of their life before everything changes. It is very exciting. You don't know what's, over that cliff edge, and these are the people you're with, and this is maybe the last time that, you guys just did this together. Every single moment of that senior year for them is maybe the last time they do that together. So there's that undercurrent of sorrow to the celebration that I think that technique speaks more rather than less with.
Yeah, and I kind of think that whether it's a documentary or a fiction feature, you picture a movie involving football and locker room scenes, and they all kind of look the same because you always imagine yelling and chest pounding and noise itself. So, it is illuminating for the simple fact that it is showing us how that is just not what it looks like. That's not what it feels like for these kids to be in the locker room and for it to be quiet as they're getting each other riled up in the way that they do through sign language. It's illuminating just showing us what it does.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting just kind of how these main characters, I guess, or these films that are pretty high marketed are about deaf people. We've got Coda coming out, which Apple acquired at Sundance, Child of Deaf Adults, which I think that's going to be later this summer on Apple TV. Sound of Metal was just up for a bunch of awards. And then there's this. I think that there's something interesting in the water where we're starting to tell these deaf stories. And I'm just interested in the fact that this is just kind of happening. And it's all really about these American stories, like these American kids going through this experience, which is not... I don't think I can think of like other films before this, and now we just kind of have three, one of which is a documentary, two of which are narrative features kind of telling these stories. I don't know, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk about representation in movies, whether that's fiction or nonfiction, so often the conversation's focused on race, at least in recent years. But I remember when, the Sarah Paulson thriller Run came out on Hulu last year. That was, all about a young woman in a wheelchair in a fairly tight little thriller that I kind of liked. I do kind of like the fact that we're getting more stuff that is about people with different kinds of disabilities, which I do think can go really underrepresented in all kinds of cinema. So yeah,
but
good
like
stuff.
Historically, like name the last documentary you saw about a living person who was deaf.
Yeah, I can't think of anything.
It's very interesting that like it's just kind of happening right now. Just this little bump. Anybody that's listened to previous Doc Talks might have heard the conversation we had about 17 Blocks. As far as I understand, this is Maryland. That was in DC, but it's like somewhere between a 2 and 4 hour drive, depending on traffic, to get from that location to this location. And it's just interesting to see the juxtaposition. There's that word. Between the youth experience in those two different cities and areas. It's a pretty stark contrast.
Yeah, we're not seeing like the home lives or like their economic situation in great detail, but just from the little bit you do see of people just kind of walking around the town, particularly Amari's father, just looks like you're walking past some boarded up buildings and stuff like that. It doesn't look like the town is thriving necessarily.
But it's also not crime with shootings and
no.
The inner homes, they seem like peaceful home lives, and it's really interesting because in Maryland we also see we've seen Rat Film from Theo Anthony. There's interesting, or I guess it's interesting to see these documentaries from the same area and just how that 2 hour geographical location kind of changes so significantly what the home life experience is for these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of expected at the first few minutes of this documentary for it to be exclusively focused on football. It's kind of nice that we dip our toes into the love lives of Amari in particular, and a little bit about the other young man, I'm forgetting his name, who's dating another cheerleader, you said, right?
Yeah. Teddy.
Satisfying stuff. I'll go for that kind of thing.
Yeah. The little trip to the ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
Always a fan. This should be on Netflix in midsummer. Do you have a favorite scene you want to mention before we jump on?
Ice cream scene's pretty good. I kind of like his little joke to the girlfriend saying he's broke and she's gonna have to pay. Thank God that was a joke. He coughs up some money. What about you?
I'm gonna go with the moment that I verbally told you that I like that shot, and it's when Amari has kettlebells in each hand and he's just walking underwater. It's something that he didn't do just for the documentary. It's part of his training routine, and they just figured out a way to rig up a camera and shoot it. But I think that it really just speaks deeper than any narrative moment could, where someone else is speaking on his behalf, to just know that this is a kid in high school that's gone through all this in his life. He works out, we've already seen that. He's good with his friends, we've already seen that. He's popular, we've already seen that. But it's God knows what hour. And he's got weights on the bottom of a pool, and he's just walking back and forth holding his breath. I think that says something deep about the character of this person that I just, not only does the shot look great, but I like the intent.
A lot of strength there, no doubt.
On to Archipelago.
On dit la mer pour le fleuve lorsqu'il est large parce que nous savons que toute mer ne l'est que pour celui qui la nomme. On a dit de nos forêts qu'elles étaient vastes, mais nous savons qu'avant tout, elles sont libres, douloureuses, habitées.
All right, Michael. Can you tell us who Archipelago was directed by?
Archipelago was directed by Felix Dufour-Laperriere.
All right. 3 times fast. You have 10 seconds. Go.
Cannot do it. I will not. Cannot. I tried. I won't even dare try a French-Canadian accent, but I think that is probably how it should be pronounced, is with a French-Canadian accent.
I think you are correct. Why don't you give us your best French-Canadian accent? Go.
No.
You should have said A.
There you go. Yeah.
So this is a 71-minute, I want to say, kind of animated, voiceovered, written text at some points. Look at like a collective story of the settling of a region in, I think it's called the Thousand Island region in Quebec. It's very unconventional. It's not quite my Mexican pretzel, which is what I was hoping for, but you know me. Once I find something I love, I just always hope that it's going to be that or better. But it takes risks in its animation style. I really like the cutout profile of the woman in the beginning and showing us the images through her. I think that offers an interesting transitive property where you feel like that person is maybe like an extension of living the life of being around those images. It's just a really unique thing that I don't think I've seen before in documentary filmmaking. And there's a lot of little things like that I loved here. But at the end of the day, it didn't quite all come together for me. I think I'm right around you with the 3-star review you have on Letterboxd.
Yeah. I kind of think my star rating will probably stay where it is. There is a real medley of styles here. You're right. Animation-wise, there's some animation that looks more like pencil sketches, some that looks more painterly. There's stuff where we're seeing live action footage that has been kind of painted on top of and just brought to life a little bit with some color animation or rotoscoping, I think, at times. There's all kinds of stuff. There's the kind of stencil kind of look that we get at times. That feels like one of the more kind of core techniques, because that figure kind of feels...
She'll fill that stencil differently. She'll either fill it with that pencil animation, or she'll put in the images.
Right, and that feels more like newly shot footage, I think, right, of the islands themselves, the water, that kind of thing.
Or just the grass.
Yeah, kind of feel like this is actually kind of a good companion with the next film we're talking about, just in that these are both films about places.
And about the body of water, defining the Homo sapien behavior of a place.
Very much so. The bodies of water are very much kind of characters in and of themselves. I'm with you. I don't know that the variety of styles here ever totally meshed for me. I do feel like this documentary strains a bit to strike a profound chord. I wish it would maybe have just lightened up in a way or another.
Steer towards joviality at some point.
It's a little humorless, especially towards the end. I do think some of the styles work better for me than others. I think that's kind of what you're going to get with something this kind of with this much variety of experimentation and animation. It's kind of interesting because it's, I think, kind of a blend of fact and fiction, right? Like, we're starting with this real geographical place, but there's clearly some artistic liberties being taken with how it's brought to life. I do think there's something interesting about that, but at the same time, I found a lot of the technique to kind of distract me in a way from the essence of the place itself, and I got a little caught up with just feeling a little overwhelmed by the technique.
Yeah, like, what is true? Where are we exactly? Why is this the footage that's being shown, right? We don't get, you know how your grandma, on the back of all her photos, she's meticulously written what year and who is in these images. We don't get any of that same respect in this documentary. We have no idea if this archival footage that appears to be like early 1900s, late 1800s is actually from this location, or if it's just from somewhere else, and you're giving me the superimposition of feeling like it's true. And that's why I loved My Mexican Pretzel, because it absolutely claims to be nothing at all, whereas the precept of this is that it's defining this one thing. And so just in that differentiation of making the claim that you're defining this thing and then not being clear about whether or not what I'm seeing is factually true or a representation of what it was like, really colors it poorly, where if you would have just told me which way that footage was either way, it wouldn't have been a negative. It would have just been an informed positive.
Yeah.
Because it would just be providing me with true information.
Yeah, like it's easier for me to describe just the techniques, as we already have done, talking about the different styles of animation. I don't know that I really... Yeah, then I don't know that I really can characterize, like, what the essence of this place is after watching this documentary, which feels like a little bit of a failure. There's kind of a preciousness to a lot of the styles. There's no water
buffalo in the water.
That's right. There's kind of this soft kind of ambient score that's kind of running from start to finish. I just think this all needs to have been loosened up a little bit. It feels just very, very precious to me. Too precious.
I think that's right, because like if you just look at each one thing, it's great. But when you put it all together, there's too much salt.
Yeah.
There's just too much. It doesn't quite work. The sound design is great when all you see is the profile of the girl, and she becomes an animation and then she turns back to grass. And then that sound stays the same and gets more kind of extravagant, which makes it more laborious the more complex the film gets, instead of just loosening up, and it doesn't pay dividends, whereas each of the things, when it gets more extravagant, is interesting. The music gets more interesting. Together, it was too much. Sensory overload. You can't keep up, and it's not actually informing the other thing. I will do a quick spoiler here. When you ask me what my favorite scene is, this is going to be the answer. But I think one of my favorite moments from documentary this year, and like most interesting things I've ever seen done as far as animation, is the way that they show the settling of on the map, and how they do these lines and these fills, and they rotate the map, and they start from the Occidental and the Oriental halves, and then they zoom in and they kind of move around. It's God, what do we call that? Screen mise-en-scène. It's kind of like a deviation of that, but it's all animation, and it's I don't know. I think that people should look at that one moment and just steal that as well as they can if they want to make maps in films really interesting.
Yeah, I like those as well. There are some moments where the frame is largely black, but we're just seeing kind of a smaller square within the frame at large that something is played out in. And yeah, one that stood out to me is where it kind of feels as if like we're looking out the window of a train, and we're kind of looking at the island terrain as we go by, and it kind of looks like it was shot but then painted on top of. It's almost a little hard to discern whether it's painting or live action footage with painting on it or something like that. That I thought was really striking and just beautiful. And then we'd go to something else, and I would be like, I don't like that at all. So it's a little uneven.
I don't like your artistic tastes anymore. Bring it back.
Which is, I think I read that there were like a bunch of animators that worked on this, and the director was putting them all together. I believe. Right? It does feel like some really disparate styles.
Yeah, particularly, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but the Scott-free Productions animation at the beginning of any Ridley Scott film. It's like exactly that animation where I think that little boy turns into like a bird and flies away. Like there's exactly that particular animation here. And I just remember thinking that, like, I wonder what the name of this particular animation is. And I love it, and I never see it.
Yeah, I think I skew towards, I prefer some of the more abstract stuff in this versus some of the more figurative sequences. There's one where, I don't even know why, but we're seeing like, an animated snake and a fox duel it out. I could have just tuned out. And then there would be something more abstract where you're just seeing these kind of animated forms kind of come to life. One of my favorite shorts of the avant-garde variety is by another Canadian filmmaker, Norman McLaren. It's called Begone Dull Care, and it's like 7 or 8 minutes. It's just kind of abstract animation come to life in just this kind of visual music, and I think those are the sequences that I very much am drawn to, and why I was probably a little all over the place as I was watching this and thinking about what would I rate this? Just never good. I never really want to be thinking about that when I'm watching a movie, but I was bouncing around quite a bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because what you're really saying is that this is one of those movies where when you watch it, you start thinking in your own head about, like, anything. You could think about the movie, or you could think about anything. Like, it's just a movie where you're going to get distracted by your own brain, because there's not enough happening to keep you drawn in, and there's simultaneously too much for you to be able to grab onto any particular thing, because as soon as you do, it'll fade and switch to something else. So there's not really any lodestone to kind of weigh yourself by in this thing. There's another moment. It's kind of, I think it's like you're describing, where it's this painting on top of the actual image, but it's also only taking up a part of the screen and the other part's black. And it's also kind of the map at the same time. Like, it's real, it's a map, and it's being painted on. And they're showing the sea level rise and fall, or the swell rise and fall of the river and the lake, and how there's more islands and less islands, and, you know, that deviation over time. That was just a really fascinating image to look at, but it also embodies my deepest criticism of the film, which is that I have no idea what the time pass was. It told me nothing about the region. I don't know if that's what happens between fall and spring, or if that's what happens between 28,000 BC and 2080. I have no idea what that spread is.
Yeah, it is a little opaque in that regard.
But it's like, I feel like I'm this infuriated because there's so much talent.
Yeah.
And it's just not quite seasoned correctly. It doesn't all come together.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, the film Loving Vincent came to mind as I was watching this.
I think this I'd prefer over Loving Vincent.
Me too. I think I'm still waiting for a documentary to use, you know, animation in this especially painted kind of animation, in a way that really works for me. I don't know that this style is right up my alley.
Yeah, I haven't seen The Tower. I'm not sure exactly what type of artistic quality that has. I just saw Dear Mr. Brody, which was that filmmaker's follow-up, and did not care for it at all. But I still need to go back and watch that one. I think it won Best Documentary, I think 2017 at South by Southwest in Austin. So maybe that's one where potentially there's interesting paintings. Do you have much more on this, or do you want to give me your favorite scene?
I think we can do favorite scenes, which I think I probably already mentioned. It is kind of that shot where it's kind of feels like we're looking out a train car window. I don't know why, I just feel like I've been particularly drawn over the past, I don't know, couple of years to trains in cinema. It just feels like the most cinematic vehicle to me, partly because of, like, the history of it, right? Like, the first couple movies in existence of trains coming into the station.
I think what really is happening is you really want to watch Kenneth Branagh and Sidney Lumet's different versions of Murder on the Orient Express. I think that's what's manifesting.
I don't know that that's what I'm saying. But
let me speak for you. This is what you're saying.
Yeah, I like that scene pretty well. What about you?
Mine is the same one I mentioned. It's the map changing and filling and those lines. It's an incredible sequence, and I've never seen anything come close to it that paints a picture over time of settlement, of ley lines, of boundaries, and boundaries being swept away. Really just kind of a transcendental moment of human settling. Onto a river runs, turns, erases, replaces. Come on. All right, Michael. This film was directed by
Shengzi Zhu, who I think I read who lives in Chicago now, but is originally from Wuhan, what this documentary is about.
This is a documentary about a river, seemingly, but also about, a single filmmaker saying, all right, Frederick Weissman, let me see what I can do.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for that comparison. So it's not something intentional that I set out to do at all, but simply because I could. I found myself counting how many shots there were in this movie, because this is a movie comprised exclusively of very long takes. So I lost confidence at some point in where exactly I was at, but I think there are about 27 or 28 shots over the course of this movie, which is about 90 minutes, a little under 90 minutes. So you're... Coward.
He couldn't even beat Kurosawa. 24, current record.
There you go. So the documentary is comprised entirely of long takes where the camera never moves. We're just looking at these static shots, wide shots of the city of Wuhan from different vantage points, with the Yangtze River often figuring somewhat centrally into the images, but not all of them. Yeah, I mean, where did this land for you?
I don't know. I didn't like it, but I respect it a lot. Kind of like a Weissman documentary. you know, it was grueling for me to pay attention. I watched it after work, you know, and it just, there were other things that I would have rather done to relax, let's say, which always, can color a film differently. But we also have different sensibilities, and you like the single take images quite a bit more, I think, than I do. In documentary filmmaking, I'm mixed on them in features. When they're useful, they're interesting. When they're, kind of wasted, they're not. Birdman's one thing, something that isn't Birdman is another thing, for instance. But there's these moments that I really like, and then there's moments that I hate, like the idiot who couldn't use the excavator correctly. I almost texted you while I was watching that scene, like, can you believe this idiot?
That was unbearable.
He can't even move the wood properly. You need to put a tongue on that bucket.
Yeah.
But then there's the moment with the saxophone and the little kid going in and out of frame. And it's just kind of this city park area, and these dogs are like meeting each other. And there's just this great saxophone noise, and he's in the upper left, and you can't really see the saxophone until like the end of that shot. And I just kept wondering, like, is this actually part of the frame or not? The sound that I'm hearing. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's magic. That's music magic. And then the other one, like, how do you not love the water buffalo taking a shit? Like,
that was towards the end, right?
That is peak cinema.
There you go. Is that your favorite scene? Spoiler?
Probably.
Yeah.
I love that saxophone, but that water buffalo just munching around, standing in the middle of the river, taking a big old duke right at the end of that movie. I was a fan.
There you go. Well, I gotta say, I love this movie, and I'm only liking it more the longer I sit with it. It is definitely a movie that I think is, sort of on the boundary between like art houses and gallery spaces. I think if anything, it's probably more likely to be found in the gallery world, just because of its pace and the fact that there's no real narrative or dialogue. The only thing we're getting that resembles, narrative are these letters that manifest as on-screen text, where unnamed people are writing letters to family members or loved ones who passed away due to COVID. The very first shot of the movie is this. It's the longest shot of the movie, I think, by a good margin, where we're watching CCTV footage of... At
the beginning, it's silent as well. And then it gets sound later, which is weird. Check
your volume before the sound comes in, because it'll be loud. I made that mistake. And we're watching, this surveillance camera footage from over, maybe 8 weeks, as the city kind of goes under lockdown, and then eventually comes out of lockdown, we're kind of looking at this little like plaza, which you can cross the street into, and there are kind of some shops on either side, and it's, you know, deserted as you would expect it to be as people have gone into lockdown, and then people kind of reemerge. So I think COVID is very much a factor in the movie for sure. But to me, there are really kind of two distinct ideas in this doc that together are just fascinating. One of which is COVID and just sort of the grief, you know, associated with all the loss that COVID has caused in this city. And then there's the, you know, development of the city itself, and we're seeing, you know, images of highways and bridges being constructed, and we're seeing all this infrastructure being developed. And, you know, you put those two together and you have loss in one hand and growth on the other hand, and you have this really really moving movie to me about just impermanence and the flow of time and how really kind of elegiac that becomes. I thought was really moving. But I completely understand why this would not be engrossing for the average viewer.
Yeah, I felt as much pull as it looked like the river had, which was very placid and no ripples. Now, I think the most important thing that you learn about in this documentary is the water buffalo. I think that's really the crescendo of the film. No, there's interesting moments, but I mean, I only get so much out of watching four men, you know, welding a bridge, you know, and I only get so much over another, you know, laborious letter about melodrama. I have sympathy that this is real people, but like, I just don't care in the context. Like it's not presenting a way for me to care. It's using sound to try to arise sympathy that is counter, not counterintuitive, but just counter to the image presented. The image presented does not beckon empathy or sympathy. It just is a fact of observation. And then constantly with its sound design, it's attempting to use this melodrama to enact sympathy and empathy. And, you know, I just didn't find that was a formula that I appreciated. There's moments that I think are beautiful in those letters, talking about the bridge, or, you know, now I realize, you know, that we never talked, or, you know, there's a couple of those lines that are great lines, but just within the film itself, I didn't find them to cohere, kind of like the same problem with Archipelago, just differently here. But just as well, there's images that are very interesting to just kind of let play out that city park with those dogs playing. But then there's, I mean, maybe it's brilliant because I remember it, but just watching the whole city light up and turn off, like, I just hated that. I just really did not like that. And it's not that the film scene is bad. It's just that, like, that grosses me out. Like, it's not Disneyland. It's a real place for people. And it feels like a giant casino city. And it just fundamentally, like, grossed me out and made me like, oh, I hate that place.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the film seems to acknowledge the gaudiness of it, especially when it's contrasted with the other sides of the city that are still basically in ruin. There are sides of the city that are just rubble, and the contrast between the like hyper modernized areas
and the
versus those, is pretty stark. I feel like that's kind of one of the ideas, is that like it is sort of jarring to watch the place where you live transform right before your eyes. I think there's something really kind of poignant about that, especially when you think about this filmmaker and this being her home, and the idea that cities, you know, over time transform, and there's a point at which you no longer really recognize
it's not yours
what they were. Yeah, and how that's especially piercing when something like a pandemic happens and people are gone, and it just seems like the city does not change. You know, the city continues its growth and transformation. That all, I think, cut pretty deep for me. About the sound, I mean, I think the fact that we're not hearing any dialogue, I thought was very moving. I just feel like there's a lot of loss that echoes in that silence. The only sound design is just kind of the natural sounds of the city. We're not hearing anybody talk.
Particularly timed with reading those journal entries, though.
What do you mean by that?
The letters or the journal entries, like, you know, those are coming in at particular moments, normally silent moments, or like sounds that are maybe empty or mournful, like there's an indication happening, and I just didn't care for the indication. But indications I did care for is like the river itself, and you know, kind of its mirror, which is the smoke in the air, the very, 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 very visible hardcore pollution in the air. And I don't know about you, but like I cringed at the moment when those men went in the river for a swim. Like I was like, don't go in there. That is nasty. Why would you go in there? And so there's like moments where it's showing me something and I'm having a really human reaction to these things, or it's speaking kind of bigger about the river or about the pollution in the air. But I think it's just a sensibility thing where you give me these long single frames and it's rare that I'm going to react really positively.
Yeah, that's I think very much the case. Sensibility is at play. I like that this is a movie partly about the passage of time and the effect that has on a place as you know it. And to me, it only makes sense that a movie experiments with duration as it explores that idea. I can't help but think about movies like the filmography of Jia Zhangke, and we talked about Ash's Purest White. I think that's the only film of his we've talked about on the show, but I feel like he's kind of considered by many to be kind of the preeminent chronicler of the transformation of 21st century China, and you're always seeing these kind of micro stories in his movies play out against the macro transformations of the country. I think there's something similar here where you're getting these personal anecdotes about people who have experienced something really lost and setting it against the change occurring across the city at large. And what's really, I think, thoughtful about a lot of the compositions is how so many of the structures, whether they're highways or they're skyscrapers, just dwarf the people that are in them. They can look just tiny as they're working on a bridge or something like that. And, you know, the idea that you can feel kind of helpless to the larger tides of or wherever you live, and whether that's a pandemic that you can feel helpless in responding to, or just the city where you live becoming something else entirely, I think is kind of striking. Yeah, there we go.
I would agree. The one thing, and this might just be me, but the film gives the impression that like there's a significantly less amount of people in this city than there is rooms in those damn skyscrapers. Like you get such a sense of like bubble inflation. I don't know if you're familiar with like the giant towers that they've made where like no one lives and they're not furnished or finished, but they look like these giant cities on the outside that China's done. But I definitely like have that distinct feeling, and that's part of what I was reminded of when they were making the city kind of dance with light, like a casino. It's just interesting because I don't think we ever see more than like 10 people in a frame. And then we're, you know, scaled out looking from that bridge at that entire city. And I did not get the impression that those rooms were even halfway full in those skyscrapers, you know?
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, you get the sense that this is kind of happening so fast that, some of it's not even in use yet. Yeah.
And like, will it be in use? It's almost like, you know, we're making something to make it. And, you know, whether or not it ever gets used is beside the point. I don't know, there's something there's a sense of despair that's, I think, separate from COVID in this documentary. I don't quite know how to place my finger on it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is just a personal thing. And, you know, it's not like where I grew up is a bustling metropolis by any means, but it's something about, like, having moved from where I grew up to where I am now, and whenever I go back and seeing new stuff and seeing things develop and just feeling like, you know, it's just a funny thing to have your memories of a place and you go back and it's not how you remember it at all. There's new stuff there, and sometimes you don't like it. You find it gaudy or something like that. It would maybe play differently if I didn't know that this is a filmmaker who's from Wuhan originally and not there now. I think that's kind of an interesting perspective of, is she an insider or is she an outsider at this point? I think how your homeland can suddenly feel very foreign to you. It's interesting.
Especially to go to Chicago, you know, it's an interesting pairing of city to city with those towering spires and the same amount of despair and all that stuff from two different economic stratas.
Yeah. All right.
Favorite scene?
My favorite scene. Are you sticking with the water buffalo?
I do not give two shits, just like the water buffalo. I'm sticking with the water buffalo.
There you go. Yeah, I don't know that I have a particular shot that's coming to mind.
What about
although
a moment in a shot?
I don't know. It's just
what about a diary or letter entry.
It's the ones that come to mind are ones that emphasize, you know, these highways and bridges and the construction workers who just look like ants. Like there's one shot where the camera's looking like directly upwards into the sky, and we're looking at these two like foot bridges that are slightly transparent, so you're seeing people walk cool on those. Yeah, and they just look so tiny, and it looks like, I don't know, almost kind of like futuristic. The fact that they seem so high up there and so tiny.
It's a brief shot too.
That one is, yeah. I think the shot length's actually maybe vary a little bit. That was striking.
Yeah, that was a good scene. Good choice. All right, that was Hot Docs 2021.
Till next year.
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!
We have to go.
I'm coming with you.
That was brilliant.
You're the best and we love you!
And that's another one in the can.